February 23, 2026. Across the United States, screens glow with breaking headlines. Axios, The Wall Street Journal, The Washington Post, The New York Times, all echo the same warning from the Pentagon. Be careful, Mr. President. A military operation against Iran could unleash consequences beyond control. Inside the West Wing, the atmosphere feels heavy. Trump listens, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But across Washington, there's fear. Fear that the United States is on the brink of a war it cannot win. Pentagon officials have sent their message through every possible channel. The Joint Chiefs of Staff issued their caution in clear language. The operation on Iran is high risk. The results could be massive, unpredictable, and devastating. The report to Trump was direct. The United States does not have the manufacturing capacity, the logistical endurance, or the political will to sustain a multi-front war in the Middle East. America's arsenal is stretched. Its stockpiles are limited. Its people are divided. General Samuel Duncan, head of the Joint Chiefs, was the voice of reason, a man known for his precision, his discipline, his quiet competence. He had successfully overseen the strikes on Iran's nuclear sites months earlier and had coordinated the operation that captured Venezuela's President Maduro. Now he stood before Trump and said plainly, "Mr. President, if you proceed with this, you must accept the consequences. This war will not be clean, it will not be short, and it will not end on your terms." In Washington commentary, one analyst compared the moment to a surgeon standing over a patient. He said, "No doctor enters the operating room without knowing the risks. You calculate them. You understand the probability of success and failure before the first incision." The Pentagon had done just that. It calculated success and failure. The numbers did not favor success. For weeks, satellite feeds showed U.S. carriers gathering in the Gulf. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the USS Abraham Lincoln, hundreds of support vessels, air defense systems, Patriot batteries, and SM-3 interceptors deployed across the region. It was the largest American mobilization since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. But this time, something was different. This wasn't a show of force. It was a test of logistics, a way to see how fast America could move, how much it could sustain, and whether it was ready for what was coming. Behind closed doors, the answer was grim. Iran is not a small country. It is vast, mountainous, hardened. It has missile cities buried deep underground, spanning hundreds of miles. It controls the mouth of the world's most strategic choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, through which a fifth of global oil flows every day. Any strike on Iran would immediately endanger those flows, trigger oil price shocks, and ignite a global economic chain reaction. The Pentagon's own modeling showed this. A strike on Iran meant retaliation against U.S. bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Iraq, and Syria. It meant missiles on Israel. It meant cyber attacks on European infrastructure. And it meant China and Russia would capitalize instantly, both politically and strategically. "Mr. President," General Duncan said again, "if you start this, you cannot control where it ends." By midday on February 23rd, the first leaks hit the press. Axios reported the warning as a direct message from the Pentagon to Trump. There is a very high risk from this operation. Within hours, the Wall Street Journal echoed the story. The Washington Post added layers of detail that the Pentagon believed a limited strike would still trigger full-scale retaliation. The New York Times confirmed that the Joint Chiefs were split, not on whether the strike was possible, but whether it was worth it. Trump watched the coverage from the Oval Office. The room was quiet. Only the hiss of the air conditioning filled the space. He liked decisive acts. He liked headlines. He liked the word victory. But this time, victory looked like a mirage. Analysts outlined three possibilities for why the Pentagon's warnings surfaced now. First, Trump was considering withdrawal, and the military wanted to pressure him by leaking the cost of a strike. Second, the military itself had detected something on the ground. A new Iranian deployment, a change in readiness, perhaps a trap. Third, this was deception, a psychological operation to confuse Tehran and make them drop their guard. But Tehran wasn't fooled. They knew war was coming. They had already mobilized missile forces, naval units, and cyber teams. They had appointed successors in case of assassination. They were ready to fight, or to burn the region with them. Inside Tehran's command centers, the mood was deadly calm. The supreme leader had entrusted security chiefs and clerical aides to run the state if the war began. He knew that Trump wanted not just a deal, but dominance. He knew the United States was not seeking dialogue, it was seeking submission. Iran had two choices, bend or bleed. It chose the latter. Every speech from Tehran now ended with the same words: "If they strike us, we will ignite the region." The Pentagon's final report to the White House was staggering. To neutralize Iran's ballistic program alone would require hundreds of targets and tens of thousands of missiles. Iran's missile cities, built deep underground, would need super-penetrating bunker busters. Each strike would require follow-ups to verify destruction. To decapitate Iran's leadership structure would take thousands more strikes. Every city, every province, every command node was linked to another. It was not a state you could decapitate in one night. And then there was the economic price. Each SM-3 missile cost $25 million to produce. The U.S. could manufacture maybe 20 a year. Only 12 were currently in production. Each Tomahawk cost $2 million. The U.S. had about 4,000 in stock. Destroying Iran's defenses would consume half that supply in weeks. General Duncan looked Trump in the eye. "Sir," he said quietly, "you can win battles, but you cannot replace missiles as fast as Iran can fire them." Beyond the math was the map. A strike on Iran would ripple through the world. China would move to secure oil routes through Pakistan. Russia would reinforce its southern flank to protect its Muslim republics from instability. Europe would fracture, Germany and France pushing for ceasefire, while Britain hesitated to host American planes. And in the Middle East itself, every actor would react. Israel would mobilize. Hezbollah would fire rockets. The Houthis would close Bab el-Mandeb. And Saudi Arabia, still recovering from its own regional shakeups, would brace for impact. It was a chain reaction, political, economic, psychological. Once started, no one could control it. Trump wanted a decisive victory, a short war, a clear headline. But Iran offered no such scenario. The Pentagon estimated that even a limited strike would trigger weeks of missile retaliation and cyber warfare. Any attempt to destroy Iran's military capabilities would take months. And even then, Iran's ideological core, its Revolutionary Guard, its faith-driven fighters, would remain. This wasn't a war you could win with optics or tweets. This was a war of attrition, a war of will. Trump's advisors knew it. Some tried to reframe the situation as a negotiation tool. Others urged him to strike hard and fast before Iran could prepare. But Iran was already prepared. The Pentagon report stressed it again and again. There is no such thing as a limited strike on Iran. Every missile would trigger a response. Every bomb would ignite a retaliation. Within hours, American bases across the region would come under fire. Israel would be hit. The region would burn. The only way a limited strike could work was if Iran agreed to pretend it was limited too. If Tehran agreed to take the blow and stay silent. No one believed that was possible. Behind the political talk, America's war machine was quietly straining. The industrial base that once powered 2 world wars was now dependent on global supply chains, especially China. Every Patriot missile required rare earth metals mined in China. Every advanced sensor depended on microchips made in Taiwan. If a war broke out, those supply lines would collapse in days. And then, for the first time in modern history, America would face a war it could not refuel. While Washington debated timelines and tactics, Iran spoke in absolutes. Its leaders believed this would be the final war, the war of survival. They did not expect to win conventionally. They expected to endure, to inflict pain, to drag America into a conflict of attrition. In that sense, they had already won, because to fight Iran on Iran's terms is to fight forever. In Tehran, young students protested again that morning, chanting against their own leaders, against war, against isolation. But in times of crisis, even divided nations unite. The Pentagon feared that a strike would do what years of sanctions could not: reignite Iranian nationalism. Wars are not won by bombs alone. They are won by the hearts that refuse to surrender. Iran had many such hearts. At the Pentagon, an economist presented a simple slide. The cost of a war with Iran would exceed $3 trillion in the first year. Markets would collapse. Oil prices would skyrocket. Allies would fracture. And yet, in that same meeting, someone whispered, "But what if we win?" It was the eternal temptation of empire, the illusion that victory can erase the cost. As Washington argued, Beijing observed, Moscow calculated. The world watched the United States wrestle with itself. China's state media ran quiet commentaries, measured, precise. They called it the American crisis of confidence. Russia, meanwhile, moved quietly to fortify bases near the Caspian Sea. European leaders called for restraint. The Gulf monarchies whispered about evacuation plans. It felt like the world was holding its breath. By nightfall, Trump met again with his national security team. The cameras were off. The questions were direct. "Can we win?" he asked. Silence filled the room. Finally, General Duncan spoke. "Sir," he said, "we can fight. But to win, we would have to destroy more than Iran. We would destroy the balance of the world." Trump didn't reply. He stood, walked to the window, and looked toward the Washington skyline, dark, silent, and heavy with consequence. By midnight, new satellite images revealed unusual movement across the Gulf: Iranian missile trucks, patrol boats repositioning, communications jamming near the Strait of Hormuz. The Pentagon screens glowed red. Everything they had warned about was already beginning. Across Asia, oil futures spiked 12%. In Europe, NATO called an emergency consultation. In Moscow, the Kremlin issued a statement urging restraint, but quietly raised its alert level. And in Beijing, the Politburo went into a closed session. No one spoke publicly, but state media issued a single line: "The world is entering a dangerous phase." The chain reaction had begun, not from missiles, but from fear. February 23, 2026, would be remembered not for explosions, but for hesitation. For the first time in decades, the United States faced the limits of its own reach. The Pentagon had drawn a line between power and wisdom and urged the president not to cross it. In the early hours of February 24th, the order never came. The aircraft carriers stayed on standby. The missiles remained in their silos, and the world exhaled, quietly, cautiously. What happened that day will be debated for years. Some will say Trump blinked. Others will say the Pentagon saved the world. But the truth lies in the silence that followed. For once, Washington listened to its own warning. For once, restraint triumphed over ego. And yet, as history shows, such moments of clarity are fleeting. The engines of power do not rest for long. As dawn rose over Tehran and Washington on February 24, 2026, both capitals stood in uneasy calm. The war hadn't started, but the illusion of stability had been shattered. The world had seen how close it came. One meeting, one decision, one word away from collapse. This is not just the story of Trump or Iran. It is the story of a global system on the edge of exhaustion, where wars are planned like investments, where peace is measured in days, not decades, and where every superpower, no matter how great, eventually meets the limits of its ambition. Because in the end, it is not the weapons that define a nation. It is the wisdom to know when not to use them. February 23, 2026, the day the world stepped back from the edge, but only just.